New voting restrictions in Texas have been stopped for now, but President Biden is still denouncing similar laws passed by Republicans in dozens of other states. He's also calling on Congress to do more. CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes has the latest.
We must act and we will act, for our cause is just.
Speaking with unusual fervor in Philadelphia, President Biden accused Republican leaders of embracing autocracy.
They want to be able to tell you your vote doesn't count for any reason they make up.
Since President Biden defeated Donald Trump last November, legislatures in 17 states have passed 28 laws that make it harder to vote.
We'll be asking my Republican friends in Congress and states and cities and counties to stand up for God's sake and help prevent this concerted effort to undermine our election and the sacred right to vote. Have you no shame?
Even as he spoke, dozens of Texas House Democrats were fanning out across Capitol Hill, one day after they fled the state by private jet.
We're hoping that Congress would understand the urgency.
Without them, a special session of the Texas legislature ground to a halt today.
The motion fails for lack of quorum.
Holding up a vote on a GOP bill that would scale back vote by mail and give more rights to partisan poll watchers who could intimidate voters. The bill would also criminalize drive-through voting and other measures aimed at easing voting.
It doesn't make voting more difficult.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott threatened to arrest the fleeing Democrats when they return. And he said stalling won't work.
I will be calling special session after special session after special session all the way up until Election Day of next year if I have to.
And Nancy joins me now from the White House with more. Hi there, Nancy. So we heard President Biden urge Congress to pass legislation to protect voting rights, as he has done on several other occasions. But is there anything more the White House can do to put pressure on lawmakers to take action?
All they can do is continue to, bring the heat the way that the president did in this speech in Philadelphia and try to push it to the front burner. The reality is that this is legislation that right now does not appear to have any Republican support, which means it's essentially dead on arrival in the Senate, because in the Senate you'd need 60 votes to overcome a Republican filibuster, and Democrats simply don't have the votes. And so it's hard to see how Congress can do the thing that Democrats so badly want to do and that the president is pushing them to do.
Well, President Biden is facing growing criticism from voting rights groups and some fellow Democrats, and they say he's not doing enough to push back against these new voting restrictions. How much pressure is the president under to get something done when it comes to voting rights?
He is under a great deal of pressure. First of all, he's under electoral pressure. We've got the 2022 midterms looming, and Democrats realize that they're going to be fighting an uphill battle if they are dealing with voting laws that have been changed in so many states. And the president has called this one of the biggest threats of his presidency. And so he's basically putting on pressure on himself to do something big. What frustrates activists and some progressives is the fact that he has stopped short of calling for the filibuster to be scrapped. They argue if he really wants to see Congress pass this legislation, then he needs to embrace a change in the filibuster rules. But that is something that the president has simply been unwilling to do up until this point. First of all, he's a traditionalist. He served in the Senate for decades, and he doesn't see it as a small matter to change the rules of the Senate in a fundamental way. And beyond that, it isn't clear that he's got all 50 Democrats in the Senate behind him. He's gotten, we've seen pushback from Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, and Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat from Arizona, for starters. There may be more. And so the White House would argue there really isn't much of a point in the president going down that road before he knows that he's got the entire party behind him.
So, Nancy, a few weeks ago, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against Georgia over its new voting laws. Could we see the Justice Department do the same with other states that have or are trying to pass restrictive voting legislation?
Absolutely. In fact, the president in his speech in Philadelphia said that he had directed the Department of Justice to double the size of its voting rights division. So, this is one of the things that the administration can do on its own without legislation. And clearly, they're hoping that this lawsuit that they're filing against Georgia is kind of a shot across the bow at other states to say, if you do this, if you put in place a new law that is as restrictive as Georgia's is, we're going to be coming after you too. Now, whether that's going to serve as a deterrent in and of itself remains to be seen. What would really do the trick, many Democrats argue, is passing a new voting rights law that would basically shore up the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s and allow DOJ to go in to states and basically block new measures that DOJ feels are restricting voting access. And that's something that the Supreme Court has been rolling back and really weakening the Voting Rights Act, and that's something that has Democrats very concerned.
Well, Nancy, before we let you go, Vice President Harris met with Texas Democrats who fled their state to block a vote on an election reform bill. What more can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, it was something of a surprise. We didn't know very much in advance that this meeting was going to take place. It was obviously meant to show solidarity with these Texas House Democrats. She argued that fighting for voting rights was as American as apple pie, and she appeared with these 60 or so House Democrats who have fled the state and who aren't quite sure at this point when they'll be returning to Texas. And so after some brief public remarks to show that support, they then conducted a meeting behind closed doors, so we know a lot less about what was said there. But what this was essentially meant to do is to send a message to other Democratic legislators around the country and state legislatures, hey, the White House has your back, and this is something that is of great importance to both the president and the vice president, who has been tapped to basically lead the White House efforts when it comes to voting restrictions.
All right, Nancy Cordes at the White House. Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome.